Yeah, you have, I mean, I'm sorry, this is outside the economic field by a long way. But yeah, I very strongly believe that you can, love generates confidence. If your parents love you, if your siblings love you, if your spouse, companion, whoever, or your children love you, it gives you that level of confidence that helps you move to the next step or do something else which is harder, bigger, or further. Yeah.
That's very, very smart and very powerful. Wow.
While much of the world focuses on terrorism in the Middle East, violent extremist groups have expanded their ambitions and reach in Africa as well. In the Western Sahel, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb has produced or inspired a proliferation of extremist groups that continue to destabilize the region. In the areas around Lake Chad, Boko Haram, with its origins in northeast Nigeria, has left tens of thousands of civilians dead and displaced almost 3 million people. The security vacuum in Libya and the presence of Islamic State and Al-Qaeda deepen the risks to the Sahel region.
There has been a lot of turmoil and trouble with these radical elements, which you find in this arc of instability from North Africa to Afghanistan.
Military intervention by regional forces, France, and the UN have weakened these groups and reclaimed territories they once held. But the drivers of militancy and the complex social, economic, and political environment that fuels these groups remain very much intact. Unless this understructure of vulnerability and criminality is addressed, extremist violence will remain an enduring threat to the region.
Air power and military space systems have revolutionized the way the U.S. military operates, and the global economy increasingly depends on reliable and secure access to space systems. The Aerospace Security Project at CSIS examines the technological, budgetary, and policy issues affecting the air and space domains. Our research is focused in 3 areas. Space security examines the evolving military uses of space and how the lack of norms of behavior can affect escalation and deterrence. It explores how alternative architectures and new space capabilities can enhance the resilience of U.S. military space systems. Air dominance and long-range strike looks at the future of air and missile forces in a more contested operating environment. It examines the role of stealth, unmanned systems, and autonomous systems, how these capabilities can be integrated to enable new operational concepts, and options for the air and ground-based legs of the nuclear triad. Commercial and civil space explores international partnerships in space, efforts to reduce the cost of launch, advances in commercial space technologies, and policy issues that affect civil and commercial space programs. The goal of the Aerospace Security Project is to provide innovative, insightful, and timely analysis to help educate and inform decision makers. As new opportunities, threats, and technologies emerge, smart policy decisions can ensure the United States continues to lead in the air and space domains. Welcome to the Aerospace Security Project.
The divided Korean Peninsula remains one of the largest sources of uncertainty and potential conflict in a prosperous and growing Asia. Unification of Korea will be one of the biggest changes to the geopolitical landscape and is seen by the world as a dark tunnel. Opacity among regional powers creates confusion. Misunderstanding impedes smart planning. False assumptions could cause costly strategic blunders. But CSIS believes the potential for growth, prosperity, and peace of a united Korea is immense. How can we maximize the social, humanitarian, and economic returns of a unified Korea while avoiding conflict? Beyond Parallel is an unprecedented and comprehensive resource for bringing transparency to the many challenges and opportunities of Korean unification. Beyond Parallel investigates the broader implications of unification, but also the specific issues that Korea and the world face. These critical issues are explored through expert analysis, satellite imagery, and cutting-edge methods of data collection. Welcome to Beyond Parallel.
Hit-to-kill ballistic missile defense is the ultimate precision guidance challenge. Many elements of a defense must come together to achieve a long-range intercept. One of the most important and difficult parts is known as mid-course discrimination. After a ballistic missile launches, its engines burn hot and can be detected by infrared satellites. Outside the Earth's atmosphere, the missile engines burn out and it reaches its peak velocity. At this point, the missile's payload, a warhead, usually separates from the rest of the body. The warhead is also accompanied by the flying junk pile of debris created by launching a missile, as well as by decoys or other countermeasures designed to complicate the missile defense job. All of these objects move together through space as part of a threat cloud. So for a missile defense system to successfully destroy the warhead, its various sensors must first discriminate it from among the various other parts of the cloud. The key to successful discrimination is the sensor architecture. Sea and land-based radars provide one picture of the threat cloud. Lower frequency radars are able to track the threat cloud, but have trouble distinguishing within it. Once cued, higher frequency or X-band radars provide much sharper images of the objects within the cloud. But radars are limited by their vantage point and by their technology. Multiple phenomenologies can provide a more complete rendering and classification. Air or space-based sensors provide still other perspectives with greater persistence, potentially allowing for birth-to-death tracking. And infrared sensors show not just objects but their heat signature, especially low-orbit satellites looking sideways, comparing the objects against the coldness of space. Currently, U.S. homeland missile defense is dependent upon only terrestrial radars. This places a large burden on the sensor network and makes it harder to identify the objects. That in turn means that the defender has to engage more of the objects in the cloud so as not to miss the warhead, either by firing more interceptors or multiple kill vehicles atop a single one. After the interceptors are launched, they receive imagery of the threat cloud, which algorithms compare to a threat database to help pick which objects should be engaged. All this is fused with the kill vehicle's own observations using onboard sensors to make the final determination for intercept. Finally, they maneuver into position to collide with the several targets that could be a warhead. The discrimination challenge is hard, but not insurmountable. An efficient and robust discrimination system should include a mix of sensors with different technologies from different domains on land, sea, air, and space.
Currently, India ranks 54th on the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index, more than 20 spots below manufacturing competitors like China and Malaysia. This is a major challenge for Modi's Make in India initiative. For example, India's truckers report that 15% to 25% of travel time is actually spent waiting at the heavily enforced state border checkpoints. They pay as much as $1.1 billion a year in bribes to state officials. The main problem is that India does not have a single national market. Its 29 states and 7 union territories each have their own system of sales taxes. As a result, internal borders look more like international ones. The version of the goods and services tax sitting before Parliament isn't perfect, but it will cut down on transit time for goods, paperwork for businesses, and could add 0.5% to annual economic growth. A seamless national tax environment will help Indian commerce flow more quickly.
I believe in strong alliances, clarity in dealing with our rivals.
What is the very last
and I take the oil of Iran.
Populism, border walls, retrenchment, and protectionism. While foreign policy is often overshadowed by economic concerns, contrasting visions of America's role in the world have played a major part in the recent election cycle. This contentious campaign season saw some of the basic tenets of U.S. foreign policy since the end of World War II called into question. Does this heightened acrimony over key aspects of U.S. international engagement reflect trends toward isolationism? It may seem unprecedented, but it is in fact not new. Today's controversies are continuations of debates that have lasted for decades. While support for the nation playing an active part in global affairs has remained strong since 1947, public opinion on key components of U.S. international engagement, such as defense spending, has waxed and waned over the last 70 years in response to economic trends, military interventions, and domestic priorities. In the first decades of the Cold War, America was committed to international engagement as a part of its strategy of containment against the existential threat presented by the Soviet Union. The U.S. experience in Vietnam, however, created an aversion to overseas military engagements that lasted from the late 1960s through the 70s. During the 1990s, the collapse of the Soviet Union led the U.S. public and policymakers to again question defense spending levels, foreign aid, and forward military presence. Many thought the limited interventions of Desert Storm in Kosovo would serve as models for future military operations. Then came September 11, 2001. Our response to the events of that day have largely defined contemporary American foreign policy since. First came the long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Their unsatisfactory outcomes left much of the public and policymaking elites disillusioned with large-scale military engagements. The result of that disillusionment has been an increasing reliance on small footprint forces for a variety of contingency operations, including in the global war on terror. At home, the most severe recession since the Great Depression exacerbated America's growing reservations about global engagement. As the economy recovered at an anemic pace, income inequality ballooned. Fewer were able to reap the benefits of our globalized economy. Opposition to free trade and large-scale immigration grew. Now, 8 years after the recession and the more than 15 after 9/11, views on the desirability of America's international engagement strategy are fractured. For the first time ever in 2009 and again in 2013, most Americans responded that the U.S. should mind its own business internationally and let other countries get along the best they can on their own. This comes at the same time that more people are concerned about major domestic terror attacks than in 2002, just months after 9/11. Do these polls reflect temporary reactions to the state of public affairs? Or is there a genuine trend toward retrenchment in the American public? Democrats and Republicans now disagree on the benefits of free trade, alliances, and multilateral approaches. Divergences in threat perceptions and approaches to international engagement have also grown between the American public and policymakers. As history shows, this is not a new debate in American politics. Yet, as distance from World War II and the Cold War grows, the rationale for a U.S. foreign policy of engagement may be growing less clear to younger generations. If the new administration decides that sustaining a strategy premised on deep international engagement is best suited for the advancement of American interests, it will have to do a better job of communicating the rationale for those policies to create a foreign policy the American public can get behind. If, on the other hand, the new administration seeks to chart a new course for American foreign policy, it will have to find avenues of consensus among an increasingly fractured public.
The supercontinent of Eurasia is home to 60% of the global economy and 2/3 of humanity. It's been called the geographic pivot of history. For over 4 centuries, Eurasia's economic focus has been the maritime passages that surround it. But during ancient times, many of the world's most important trading routes ran overland. Today, regional powers are putting forward competing visions for reconnecting Asia. Roads, railways, and other infrastructure projects could revive overland routes. They could forge new maritime connections, and they could reshape the global economic landscape. The stakes are high. Last century's infrastructure projects fueled development, but also competition, and even conflict. Today's efforts could echo well beyond the region.
The basic reality is that the division of the world into kind of totally separate, autonomous entities and other areas controlled by sometimes foreigners is coming to an end. We are getting one interconnected world.
But critical questions remain about these massive investments. What's driving these projects? Will they connect in an economically meaningful way?
What does that foretell? What does that mean in terms of political ambitions and how people will look at the region differently, and will they behave in a different way?
The Reconnecting Asia project provides new tools for answering these questions. beginning with what's really happening on the ground. Use this interactive website to track the evolution of Asia's infrastructure network at the project level. Explore the who, what, and why behind these megaprojects. See tomorrow's supercontinent through the eyes of regional powers. Make sense of it all with expert analysis that uncovers the trend lines behind today's headlines. This is reconnectingasia.csis.org.
China is rising. Its economy is now the second largest in the world. China is the world's largest trader, having surpassed the United States, and Chinese military capabilities are expanding. In just a few decades, China has moved from the periphery to the center of the international system. But what does that really mean for the world? In some ways, China is a developed country, yet in other ways, it is still developing. China's transformation is often misunderstood, and the future of Chinese power is uncertain. Power itself is a nebulous concept. Power can be relative. It can be absolute. It can be perceived and anticipated. So how can we decipher power? Through China Power, CSIS unpacks the complexity of China's rise by analysing the key components of Chinese power. What are China's strengths? What are its weaknesses? Does China's rise present a threat or an opportunity? Or both? What questions are you asking? Join the conversation at chinapower.csis.org.
The war in Syria represents a new low for the international community. We're seeing a war without law, as well as seemingly a war without end. It's very, very striking that we're living in an age of the bombing of UN convoys, never mind the targeting of hospitals.
So we were so surprised and shocked when we saw our colleagues covered with their blood and giving their last breaths. I don't know how to describe that. It's so hard emotionally. It's like you are losing one of your precious in front of your eyes.
We're witnessing a profound surge of violence against civilians, against health workers, patients, facilities, humanitarian convoys.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a rainy day, but we're going to add some sunshine and light in our discussion today and try to open up some new ways of thinking about politics in Japan and politics around the world and what the implications are for the U.S.-Japan alliance. We are very pleased to have as our guest today Mr. Toru Hashimoto. He is now the legal and policy advisor, but in fact the creator of what is known as the Nippon Ishin no Kai, the Japan Restoration Party. He has been a high-profile activist and outspoken governor and mayor of Osaka, and he founded the Osaka Ishin no Kai, Osaka Restoration Party in November 2015. He's a lawyer by training and has practiced law since 1996. He is a frequent commentator on television and in media on domestic, political, and economic issues and foreign affairs. He's the host of Hashimoto and Hattori no Bangomi, which is on TV Asahi. He's active on Twitter and is making his first major speech, I believe, in the United States. And what we'll do is I will shortly invite Hashimoto-san here to the podium, and then we'll engage in a short back and forth discussion, and then we'll open it up to your questions. Let me quickly end by doing what I should have done at the beginning, which is to let you know that we take security precautions seriously now at CSIS. If for any reason we have to move out of the building, I'll let you know what to do. But basically, we will go out that way and out the front door and then rally back at National Geographic, which is out to the left, and then hopefully, if anything happens, we'll come back and conclude. But we've never had to use that. With that, on behalf of CSIS, let me thank Toru Hashimoto and invite him to give opening remarks to all of you today. Thank you.
My name is Toru Hashimoto. You see, in Osaka and in Japan, I have been called as a populist. So, I actually can relate to Mr. Trump, how his sentiment is. You have gathered here today. For those you are among you, must be political establishment with much intellect and perspectives. And then I have to make myself excused to tell you that my speech doesn't contain information that criticizes the political establishment. And in June of 2016, Brexit was determined by the people of the UK through referendum. In November 2016, the American people chose President Trump. The political establishment, for those who belong to the political establishment, was astonished. And there was talks about the whole world going into pandemia. And I'm sure that many of you think that this was a really bad result. You see, last June, the British referendum and also in the U.S. American presidential election, I actually visited both countries to interview people, and I have also conducted hearing not solely on the political establishment, but I also wanted to focus on talking to regular folks. So through which I have found some different reality that the media has been reporting. The British people who decided to get out of the EU, and then the American people who support Mr. Trump, I felt that there was actually in large numbers, more than I thought. And as a political commentator, between the perception of the political establishment and the regular people seemed to be seemed to be a wide gap. And so therefore, the thought is that the politicians is not really able to understand and grasp the perception or the sentiment of the regular folks. The Brexit and the birth of Trump administration, or President Trump, and this, along with that, there will be a election in France in April. I would also planning on going to visit and take some hearing. And regarding these points, all the political establishment claims that these results are leading to populism. That's all I hear. And then populism really refers to certain things that the media talks about right now, but I kept wondering, is there any room for us to really reflect upon our past, reflect upon what we are going through this word of populism? You know, when the word populism is used whenever any political result is opposing or against to one's belief, and that is really, it's used as a label, but is that really true? You see, I feel that at the core of democracy is populism. At the center of the democracy is run by the will of the general public. And of course, democracy does have a lot of dangers. Nazi Germany, and other history tells that populism could lead to a dangerous situation. However, there really is no 100% correct political system. If you look back to the history, if you look at another opposing ideology, the tyranny, of course, the tyranny would be much worse off than a democracy. Soviet Stalin, and in North Korea, and the reality of the disputes in many northern African countries. Of course, democracy is far superior to any of the ideologies spread among these regions. And the democracy does stand by the support of the general public. And then when the policy is supported by the majority of the public, to label that as populism really leads to or is equal to denying the aspect of democracy. So in order to lead to a much better result for the people, that is the role of the democracy and the political establishment. But to call the results selected by the majority of the public populism, I believe is not right. So today I would like to talk about U.S. and Japan alliance. Normally, the people from a political establishment will will participate in dialogue in terms of special high-level intellectual level about the alliance. But today I would like to talk more about the sentiment of the regular citizens. That will be the center of my speech today. Even if I talk about type of things that a specialist would say, it really doesn't have much meaning. So because I have been called a populist, I would like to share with you the sentiment and the awareness or the perception of the Japanese public. I can tell you that I am very confident in really having a good grasp of that. So that is what I would like to talk about today. I'd like to talk to you briefly about my background, just as Dr. Green has mentioned. Just to go a little bit more in detail, 9 years ago, in 2008, I was 38 years old, and I had became governor of Osaka. And then after then, I have raised my own policies. It might be hard for you to understand, but it was really it gained a lot of attention in Japan, called Osaka Metropolis idea. And based on that policy, I have created a Osaka Ishin no Kai. You see, Osaka Metropolis idea, the idea is really based on creating a metropolis in the Osaka area. So in the United States, I guess it could be equivalent to demolishing Washington, D.C. and to create a brand new state. Of course, I'm not saying which one that is right or wrong, But that is a type of idea that I was trying to establish in Osaka. You see, in Osaka, there is a Osaka prefecture and an Osaka city. Both are big administrative bodies, but I wanted to create a new administrative body from scratch, and that is really what the basis of this Osaka Metropolis ideas is about. And to support that, I created Osaka Ishinokai, and when I was a governor of Osaka, my belief was that in order to really make this as a reality, I became a Osaka mayor, and with this, you see these Osaka Ishinokai and the Osaka Metropolis idea, I really started from scratch. I had no organization, I had no financial backups, but I have fought against the existing political parties in the election, and in Osaka, we have become the first opposing political party. And in order to establish or make this Osaka Metropolis idea as a reality, we needed to change the statutes. So we have established a new political party called Nihon Ishinokai. And in this, our political party also fought in the national election, and then we have became the second largest party outside the ruling coalition. And we have started from scratch, and we have really spoke to the people's minds, and then that is how we have become a large opposition party. And the referendum for the Osaka Metropolis idea was held for the first time. And what I mean by the first time is that in the big city Osaka, to have such a large-scale referendum was a first attempt in Japan. So within this referendum for Osaka Metropolis idea, I have bet my political career. However, we were defeated by a margin of 0.8%. And this Osaka Metropolis idea is something that I have worked on for my 8 years. Unfortunately, it ended as a defeat. So I did resign from the office to take responsibility as I had pledged. And as today, I work as a lawyer and also as a political commentator on television. I also am still a lawyer. So it is not that I have been in the political world for my entire career. It was just my 8 years that I spent as a politician. But outside of those 8 years, I have been working as a lawyer or a commentator on TV. So I really do not regard myself as a political establishment. I do not have much academic knowledge of policies. However, as I mentioned earlier, due to the background of my career, I have been called as a populist, but I do know that I do have a good grasp of what the sentiment or the perception of the general public in Japan is. Now, I would like to talk about the Japan and U.S. alliance from the viewpoint of a regular Japanese citizen. At CSIS, which is a very famous think tank, I know that many famous political establishment, including Japanese, have given speech here, and I have heard many of them. But when I heard these speech, I have never really agreed completely with the content of the speech. I wouldn't raise the names of the people who gave the speech, but when I hear their talk, something just doesn't sit right. The speech really doesn't grasp the genuine perception or the awareness of the general public in Japan. That is my thought. As we think about the U.S. and Japan alliance, I would like to talk about the perception of the regular Japanese public, but in order to do so, I have organized the Japanese public into 3 generations. The first generation refers to those who experienced the fierce battle during World War II. The second generation refers to those who are the children of the generation who experienced the fierce battle during the war. The third generation refers to those who are the grandchildren and the following generations of those who experienced a fierce battle during the war. I belong to the third generation. The first generation is characterized by the awareness of defeat in the war. In this gruesome war, not to repeat it again, that is the basis of their awareness. And based on that, to create a new world order, which is the post-war societal order in Japan. But this generation tends to accept this in an unconditional manner. And they tend to deny categorically the pre-war Japanese political system and the societal structure. And on the other hand, they tend to accept any post-war structure. For this generation, they tend to receive and accept all of what has been given to them in the post-war era. And the second generation, which is the children of the people who experienced World War II, this generation has experienced the harsh reality of the Cold War between and in the meanwhile being questioned and being and in struggling between accepting the criticism of being the nation who lost in the battle. And yet, they do have a desire for being respected as an independent sovereign nation. So there is that inner struggle within them. So this generation, they often struggle to have the sentiment to dismiss the post-war Japan and instead to have a positive view towards the pre-war Japan. The third generation, which I belong, and also the generations following me belong to, you see, my generation views World War II as what took place in the history. Of course, we don't deny it, deny the responsibility of what Japan did. But we really don't have this sentiment of ourselves causing the gruesome war. Rather, we view the war as a history, a part of the history in Japan. You see, we are a generation that has enjoyed the values of mostly mature democracy and freedom. So we are also a generation that is able to think in a rational way. So the first generation denies categorically the pre-war Japan. The second generation rather opens up a little bit to the pre-war Japan. But our generation, we don't really it doesn't matter whether it's pre-war or post-war. We are the generation who accept what is, base our perception on what is rational and not. And in terms of the pre-war Japan, we see some beauty in the pre-war aspects, and then we wish to continue the tradition. But as far as the political system also has how it has altered after the war, we also accept it just the way it is. However, we also have this rational way of thinking, desiring and seeing some aspects that need to be changed in the post-war Japan. So the generation of myself, and some of them might not be able to believe this, but some people in my generation don't even know that U.S. and Japan have been engaged in a war and has been enemies in the past. You see, some elementary school students or college students in Japan even say in surprise, asking, did U.S. and Japan really fought against each other in the war? So that is really where we are in my third generation. And as we think about the future of the U.S.-Japan alliance, we must not base our thoughts on the first and second generation perception, but for the future, we really need to think more with the third generation perception. I believe that the second generation really is at the pinnacle of what happens in the political arena, but I feel like they really don't know what is in the minds of the third generation. But like I said, the third generation accepts what is rational, and then we want to change what is not rational. That is a characteristic of my generation. And just as just recently in February, I believe, there was a U.S. and Japan summit meeting, and within the joint declaration, United States have declared to provide the nuclear umbrella to Japan. And the other declaration was regarding the Senkaku Islands, which are the very small islands that belong to Japan. The U.S. made it clear that the Article 5 of the U.S. and Japan Security Treaty applies. So the political establishment in Japan was overjoyed by this news. The United States is protecting us with the nuclear umbrella. All the media, all the newspaper and TV have stated, and then they highly welcome this news. However, the third generation, the regular citizens of the third generation, is wondering, can we really believe this? Can we really be all happy about this? That is the sentiment. And this certainly, this declaration can serve as a deterrence towards North Korea, China, and Russia, who are causing instability in the Asian region. However, the regular folks, they don't really have much knowledge or have intellectual knowledge about India. And of course, they don't, so the third generation do not accept without much questioning about this declaration. And of course, the general public, the third generation, regular people do look at this joint declaration in a very calm manner. You see, when you think about it, United States, are they really ready to be engaged in a nuclear war to protect Japan? They say they provide a nuclear umbrella, but are they really mentally ready to be engaged in and also for saying is America ready to have their soldiers shed blood for Japan just for these tiny islands called Senkaku Islands? You see, the regular folks of third generation thinks in a very rational way. So they put themselves in the shoes of America. That is that is the view that they have. So in other words, will Japan be ready to shed blood for tiny islands that belongs to the United States? I don't think many Japanese people would agree to that. Rather than that, I believe that the third generation regular citizens do not wish to be engaged in any war that is started by United States. So Japan is not ready to shed blood for United States or other countries. So of course, why should United States be ready to shed blood for Japan? That is the sentiment of the regular citizens. So the third generation think, would the United States really shed blood for Japan? Would America really be engaged in nuclear war for Japan? They're highly doubtful of that, and that is a sentiment of a regular people of the third generation. Recently, Prime Minister Abe has reviewed Japan's national security statutes and resulted in instituting a legislation that appears to have recognized the so-called collective self-defense rights. It is, and I understand that many U.S. Political establishment may have misunderstood that this new legislation have achieved a state in which both nations are committed to protect each other. Of course, Prime Minister Abe fought hard, but this new piece of legislation is limited within the scope of protecting Japan, and within that scope, the legislation is designed to help or assist U.S. Therefore, many Japanese citizens, including those among third generation, would not permit to genuinely protect America without any conditions. And this new, the U.S. and Japan security treaty does have a characteristic of U.S. or has a responsibility to United States to protect Japan, but the third generation regular people do not have much of a sentiment or idea or wish to protect the United States. So based on this difference in the idea among the regular Japanese folks, we must question whether this alliance is based on a strong trust relations. You see, the political establishment say the U.S. and Japan alliance is very strong and that is very trustworthy, but as representative of the third generation of Japan, I have to say that is not the same sentiment among us. And my generation and the generation following us, the reason why we came to this idea or perception is, I believe it's based on the post-war Japan society, but the biggest reason really is the education provided to us based on the Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution. This Article 9 really briefly says it's an ideology that talks about peace. It teaches that peace can be achieved solely by diplomatic effort, and any military force is not necessary. So this is a kind of ideology or education that we have been taught. Therefore, we a very cryptic concept for the rest of the world, but that is the idea or the notion in Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution. And that is how our perception is formulated. The self-defense force is not regarded as a military force in Japan. It really is limited to defending or the defense force. It is regarded more as an extension of a police force. So we would never call the self-defense force a military force, and the Liberal Democratic Party tried to call it a national defense military force, but the regular citizens are against that idea. So the Japanese people do not really think about the military or having a military force. So it's beyond imagination for us to think about protecting other countries with our military force. And it's also unimaginable for us to be protected by the military force by other countries. And that is the perception, or at the core of the perception of the third generation. And based on this perception of Japan, let's think about the U.S. and Japan alliance based on this perception. You know, in the United States, I have spoken to the regular citizens in the United States. And there are really very few people who understand that Japan is limited in terms of assisting the United States. American regular people think that, of course, Japan can help America in times of crisis. But they don't know so much about the Article 9 of the Constitution. But when I tell the American people, well, actually, Japan is not really allowed to protect American people, then they tell me, well, that is unfair. And in the joint declaration of the U.S. and Japan summit meeting, I asked them, you see, in the declaration, the U.S. soldiers are supposed to be shedding blood for these small islands called Senkaku Islands. Then a lot of the American people actually are surprised to know that. They question, why would American soldiers need to shed blood for such small islands? When you think about of course, we have the underlying idea of U.S. and Japan security treaty, but at the regular citizens level, how they perceive, that is not really well understood among the political establishment. And if without that understanding, I think the political world will not proceed properly. So United States have declared the nuclear umbrella, and even if the Article 5 of the Security Treaty will be applied to the Senkaku Islands, if the general public questions that idea, that notion, then of course the policy won't move forward. Of course, I do not have a full understanding of the sentiment of the American people, and I will leave that task to you. And I do have a good grasp of the Japanese sentiment. And I would ask the American political establishment to have a better grasp of the sentiment or the perception of the general U.S. public. Without having that understanding, you will most likely again get into the situation that you just experienced in the U.S. presidential election or the Brexit referendum.
当時ですね、日本は世界からどのように見られていたかというと、おそらく今の北朝鮮と同じように。
Let's look at the perception of Japan during World War II. What did the rest of the world think about Japan? We can think of this in terms of North Korea. What if North Korea were to do something militarily provocative? I imagine that in some sort of dangerous situation, the rest of the world would move to disarm North Korea and deprive it of military force. and probably there would be attempts to completely change its social structure. We can think of Japan's situation in World War II as analogous to North Korea currently. In other words, the rest of the world stripped Japan of its military capability, changed its social structure completely, and constructed the post-war order. The second generation, in other words, people of the generation before me, they were on board with this. They went along with this. And the rest of the world's view of Japan has changed since that time. In the direct aftermath of World War II, Japan was looked at as a dangerous country, as a country that could not be trusted, and that's only rational. And what I've found out is that with President Nixon, his visit to China, that Mr. Kissinger was involved in the preparations with Xu Enlai, and they talked about the presence of U.S. bases in Japan, and Mr. Kissinger said that the bases there were to prevent rearmament of Japan, and there was a military commander, Mr. Stackpole, who said that the U.S. bases act as a cap in the bottle to prevent a recurrence of militarism in Japan. Currently, Japan is completely different from the country that fought in World War II. The policies we've had in the post-war era, Japan has also played a large role in rebuilding, and the rest of the world has helped us as well. The cooperation from the rest of the world has been instrumental, and so we are currently in a good situation. So I don't think anyone would view us as analogous to the North Korea of now. We have a free press, we have politicians who are closely followed by people. If there's even just a little gaffe, can lead to calls for resignation. Even just a slight miscalculation can be the end of a politician's career. The Abe administration is currently in difficult straits, and the reason for that is that there is concern that there might be missiles fired from North Korea toward us, so that we're in a very dangerous situation. But with that as a background, the national government sold a piece of land to a school for a couple of $1 million, much lower than the market price was. And this is currently consuming the diet. What happened here? It's a large scandal. So if you look at that, we can think this really is a democratic country. We really are a mature democratic country, and the people act as a check on politicians who are in power. So as a view of what people think, they can completely change the direction of politics. And this is completely different from Japan before and during World War II. Also, we have been very interested in the American lifestyle, American culture. We very much enjoy it and like it. And when we meet an American, sometimes one might have difficulties. In other words, there may be initial misgivings, but people realize that Americans are just people just like they are. So it's easy for us to become friends with Americans. And let's look at how Americans view Japan. Japan has the military force necessary to defend itself, and this is something that the United States understands, but my feeling is that we really need to change our situation. We really need to further strengthen and deepen the U.S.-Japan military alliance. And the reason is that Japan has to be in a position to shed blood for the United States. Japan needs to be able to contribute to defense of the United States. If we don't have this feeling and understanding, then we will not be able to fight for each other in a war. I think that this complementary preparation to fight for the other country is something that is absolutely necessary for the continuation of our military alliance. And if we look at our people's perception now, there are questions about whether the United States will protect us, and there also is large opposition to the idea of Japan fighting for the United States. And so what is it that we need to change? I think what we need to do is, with the Article 9 of the Constitution, Japan needs to be able to protect itself to the extent possible, given the strictures of Article 9. We can't just say the United States will protect us, the United States will fight for us. What we need to do instead is to be prepared to do everything it is that we can as far as we're allowed by Article 9. We need to have military force, a much better military force than we have now, in order to be able to defend ourselves. And the reason that we don't have a good military force now is that we depend so much on the United States. So we need to bear part of the burden of this relationship. The United States currently has fiscal difficulties, and in order to maintain our military alliance, we need to have a more equitable sharing of the fiscal burden. At least that's what President Trump says, and that Japan needs to be able to contribute more. And I feel that that is correct, and that's something that we need to deal with. That's basically something that must become our mission, is my feeling. But for those of us in the third generation, those of us who are just ordinary citizens, we do want to do what we can under the strictures of Article 9, but the idea of having a true military force, this is something that really brings an end to any kind of conversation. And this is an area where the Japanese political establishment can play a large role. The establishment should talk to people about the possibility of having military force, and the political establishment should not look down on people and force some kind of ideas on them, but it should be able to talk to people directly and to change their perceptions. But there are a lot of difficulties. I think it would take a number of years to be able to change people's perception on this military issue and security issues. How many years would we have to spend to convince voters of the necessity of having a military, of changing their perception? It's quite a long process, I think. So I think that we should have a new approach, and that is to have strong foreign pressure from the United States. It's kind of pitiable that we have to have foreign pressure in order to change things in Japan. If you look at Japan's history, that's often been the case. Recently, for instance, the Edo shogunate faced the black ships of Commodore Perry, and that foreign pressure is what caused Japan to change from the Edo shogunate to the Meiji government, and also from the pre-war to the post-war transition, Japan changed. So you can say that World War II was a form of foreign pressure. Also, TPP is a form of foreign pressure. While we do say that we are in favor of the TPP process, we're not sure what the economic and effects will be. I'm in favor of it. But TPP, you can look at this also as a form of foreign pressure. It is a way, a means to promote many different kinds of reforms domestically in Japan. This is something that we might not have been able to do on our own. It's something that we needed to have foreign pressure to cause us to undertake. So I think that we need to keep in mind reality, and if necessary, we should have the United States apply pressure to us. The Foreign Ministry of Japan and the Japanese government would say, well, you shouldn't pressure us like that, or they might say, they might point to things that President Trump said during the campaign, demands for Japan to pay more, for Japan to have more of its military force. That can be looked at as over, that we shouldn't revisit these issues. I think that's what the Japanese government would say. But I think that we need to think about these things, and we also need to have the United States pitch us a fastball. And with that fastball, if we could hit that, that would lead to waking up of the third generation. I think that there have been a number of things that President Trump has said that have been quite that have led to a lot of discussion in Japan. And I've been on a political program for 3 weeks in a row, where we looked at the American approach to American perceptions of national security. And I think that we, as a result of President Trump's election, have had a chance to examine our own thoughts and perceptions on our own security. The Secretary of Defense came to Japan, and he decided to try to ratchet down the comments that have been made on Japan, the idea that Japan should pay for more of its defense, or that the United States might withdraw from the U.S.-Japan alliance or something like that. But I think that comments like that are actually good for us. They should be a trigger for us to think about our situation, about what it is to protect another country, about what it is to have another country protect us. I think that this would allow us to think for the first time about the idea of fighting for another country. So I think it's important. So I'd like to conclude my remarks there. While I am not an establishment figure, in fact, you are establishment figures, I'd like you to think about what I had to say, and I'd also like you to know that we are not in the situation to fight for the United States now. Rather, at some point, we need to change our perception so that we can contribute more to the alliance and contribute more to deterrence. But in order to do that, we need to really change the perception of the Japanese people. And so the ordinary Japanese people and the American people, if they can trust each other, that will be the necessary ingredient to allow them to fight for each other, to spill blood for each other. This is the kind of change that we need to bring about in the third generation, and so I hope that you will work with us in that regard. And those of you in the political establishment with expertise, I think you should talk not only to other people with expertise, not only the political establishment talking amongst itself, but I think that we need to talk much more to the people, so that the establishment should talk to the people as much as possible in order to change people's perceptions. Thank you.
So Hashimoto-san has given us a speech that was clearly not written by bureaucrats, and a speech that goes to some raw questions about Japan's economy, history, U.S.-Japan alliance. I suppose since I was born in Washington, grew up in Washington, work in a Washington think tank, and I'm wearing a Brooks Brothers suit, I'm a card-carrying member of the establishment and the Ampo Mafia. But from my perspective, and I think many members of the so-called Ampo Mafia, the U.S.-Japan alliance gets stronger whenever there are fundamental questions about whether it's effective for each side. The strengthening of the alliance under Kishi and Eisenhower, or Nakasone and Reagan, or other periods, happened when one or both sides said, this isn't working the way we need it to work. And so I welcome, personally, these kind of hard questions. But there's one more question that Americans might ask if they look at this issue, which is, would Japan shed blood to defend the Senkakus? And that's my question for you. For the U.S., if Japan can defend its archipelago, that's a huge contribution for us, and probably the most important. We don't need Japanese forces defending us in New Jersey or NATO. But if Japan can defend the Western Pacific around Japan's own territory, that's what we need. And so it's about budget, but it's also about willpower. And you have a finger on the pulse of the Japanese public. Do you think the Japanese people have the willpower, and political leaders have the willpower to defend the Senkakus and defend Japan's territory? That'd be my first question.
That is a really important question. The Abe administration and the politicians in Japan, they claim, the conservatives, they claim that they want to protect Senkaku with their own hands, but the third generation and the regular general public do have a question. They say, I don't know what you mean. For how come we have to have a military conflict over such small islands called Senkaku? The United States and political establishments tell us to protect the Senkaku, but we really don't understand the meaning of that. I studied this, and so the Senkaku Islands has meaning in the security of the South China Sea. I understand the importance that it has in the security arena, but I don't think the general public really understand that in Japan. If there is a military conflict over Senkaku Islands in this democratic nation, if that such thing happens, then it will have to have a political move. But I think before that, I think the general public will stop even before it will move to that point. But the Japanese politics do not even understand that general sentiment. That's why they're saying we had to protect Senkaku, we had to apply the Article 5 of the treaty. And then, of course, the Japanese Coast Guard is protecting the ocean, and I really respect that. But I think that the general public is not ready to be engaged and protect our country like that, and that's what I would like the U.S. public to know as well. You see, many of the Japanese public, I don't think, is ready for that point. And then within that, given that situation, that is why we question: is America really ready to protect the Senkaku? The joint declaration of the U.S. and Japan, I feel like that was almost like a comedy or a farce.
It's understandable people would ask that question about American willpower, especially after President Obama walked away from commitments he made with respect to Syria. But the whole point is to not fight a war over these small islands, and the best way to do that, to avoid fighting a war, is to demonstrate that both the U.S. and Japan have a strong commitment to preventing China from using its force to weaken the U.S.-Japan alliance, to weaken smaller states in the first island chain, such as the Philippines, and to establish some hegemony over Asia. So this is a dilemma for political leaders, because China doesn't really want to fight, clearly. And it's rather extreme for American or Japanese political leaders to talk about war with China when most of the public wants to make money off of China. But that's one of the dilemmas, because ultimately, if Beijing thinks the US and Japan are not willing to fight to defend their interests, then Beijing will be more tempted to try to use military force, not for war, but to change the status quo and to gradually expand. So I asked the question, I appreciate your honest answer, because this is something both sides face. I want to ask about politics, too. So Japan maybe had its anti-establishment revolution, and it was led by Hatoyama and the DPJ, and it ended very badly. So my question is, can an anti-establishment political movement actually govern? And people are asking that question right now about Donald Trump, even his supporters. Can an anti-establishment political movement actually govern the country?
Before I answer your question, I just want to clear up, I think might be a misunderstanding, and that is that in the U.S.-Japan summit, the declaration that came out, I was very happy about that. If we didn't have that, then we would not be able to have any deterrence vis-a-vis Russia, China, or North Korea. What I wanted to say is that if the people aren't behind us, then in an emergency or in any situation, we will not be able to govern. Prime Minister Cameron had the Brexit vote, and I think that no matter how much the leaders say they want to do something, if the people aren't behind them, then things don't proceed. So the people are a check on power. And this Senkaku issue and the political establishment in Japan, policymakers in Japan do declare that they are going to protect and keep the Senkaku Islands, but if people aren't behind them, then that won't happen. And so they need to explain, why is it that these Senkaku Islands are important? Why is Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty important? Why does it cover the Senkaku Islands? If we don't explain that to the people, then things won't move forward. We need to be much more proactive in explaining it. As far as governance is concerned, the anti-establishment movements, whether they can actually govern or not, this is a difference, I think, between the United States and Japan, which is I am 38 years old, and at 38 I became the governor of Osaka, and I said that I was going to change things, break the mold in Osaka, and I was going to overthrow the current situation in Osaka, but I was unable to do that. And the reason for that is the existence of the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is a large drag on moving things forward, and also they can basically take over what politicians want to do. So in dealing with the bureaucracy, it is if the anti-establishment can work through the bureaucracy, then they can govern, I think. As far as the United States is concerned, I'm not up enough on the situation here to be able to answer that. But I think basically the bureaucracy is important. The idea that anti-establishment figures cannot rule, that idea seems un-American to me. It seems to me that the United States is an area in which people compete and things get better as a result. It's an area where your performance is encouraged. But in Japan, it's much more reactive or much more difficult. We have much more vested interests, and it's much more difficult to change things. So I would be interested to know more about the situation in the United States. But the reason we really can't change things as much as you can here is that the presence of the bureaucracy, and it's something that can't be resisted. In other words, we have very talented bureaucrats, so no matter what kind of politicians we have in power, the bureaucrats are behind the scenes, and so things can move forward. The Abe administration has been able to work with bureaucracy. The Hatoyama government was fairly powerless, but the bureaucrats behind the scenes, and so they were able to drive things forward. In the United States, you have a number of different people from all sorts of different worlds who are involved in the governing process. So you have a lot of different elements in place. I think this is something that we need to have a little bit more of in Japan.
Me run a little over. I hope people don't mind. I spoke to the Ishinokai members in Tokyo, and I've spoken to Kome and LDP and DPJ, Benkyokai, but I have to say the Ishinokai had so much energy and ambition and drive, very genki soda, very sort of active and confident party. But structurally, how does the Ishinokai expand to be a national party? I mean, it did it in name, but how does it actually expand? And I'm asking in part because in Tokyo, Koike Yuriko may soon push the LDP out the way Ishinokai pushed the LDP out of Osaka. And this is the most sensitive of all questions, but how does Ishinokai expand? Well, how do you do that? Is there some future where major city parties align, coalition with the LDP? So how do you become a national party, not just in name, but really in terms of where people get elected?
The reason why we were able to have this, or this party that we started from scratch, and then we were able to become the second biggest opposition party, is, in one word, because I was not a political establishment. You see, the political establishment, they all include LDP, DPJ, and Komeii, but the Japanese public really are not really happy about that. In UK, France, the United States, it seems that they all, the sentiment are shared among all these countries. You see, the political parties, they all believe that they are in the right. So when somebody is not in agreement with them, they deny whoever is against them. But you cannot deny completely, categorically, the general public. So you have to understand that the general public are against certain ideas of certain political parties, and then so we have to have a political party who, with a clear understanding of what the general public understands or feels. So the reason why Isshinokai became thus far is because we have this attitude that we are not a political establishment. And then the reason why we are not able to grow much drastically recently is because we are becoming the political establishment. It is a hard thing. You see, I have been in political world, so it's easier said than done. To become to really be consistent with anti-establishment is a hard thing. When you are in the political world, you receive a lot of criticisms. You not just criticism, but also there are also people who whisper to you, "Well, we will support you. We will cooperate with you." So when you are in an anti-establishment mode, it's a repetition of fighting, and that is what Mr. Trump is doing right now. But you eventually become tired, and then so you start to think about ways to compromise. So at that point, you become the establishment. And then that is when the public would depart from you, dismissing you as an establishment. And then some people may say I'm still an anti-establishment. But this is something that the general public will evaluate. The Isshinokai needs to be consistent about being anti-establishment, or else we will become a part of the establishment. You see, Ms. Koike, she has expressed the attitude of anti-establishment by still being a member of the major political party. But I know at some point she's going to get tired. After 8 years, I try to be consistent, but it does become tiresome. So it really is, how you be consistent with it.
Prime Minister Koizumi's secret, too. He was the ultimate establishment as Prime Minister, but he was always fighting the LDP and the establishment, it seemed. Interesting. So we're running over, but let's take maybe 2 questions and then let you answer both of them. We'll start with Kevin in the back.
Hi. Nice to meet you, sir. Welcome to Washington. I have a comment and a question about the Security Alliance. I have to say I disagree with your statement that populism is democracy, because if you're just listening to the public and the public doesn't understand security issues, that's not a good situation. You need to educate the public. Specifically, you stated the Senkakus as an example of doubts on the 3rd generation that you mentioned, doubts about whether the U.S. would defend the Senkakus, or doubts about whether the U.S. would risk a nuclear war to defend Japan. It's the wrong question. People have been asking this wrong question for a long time, not just the 3rd generation. If you look at the security treaty, it doesn't mean the U.S. defends Japan. It's always meant the U.S. and Japan defend Japan together. So Mike's question is the right question. Is the Japanese government, the Japanese people, prepared to defend Japan? And the trend we've seen on the Abe administration is more responsibility sharing, more building of Japan's own defense capabilities within the framework of Article 9 so that Japan can contribute. That's why you have collective self-defense. But I think we're talking to the different Japanese. When I talk to many Japanese, they understand the threats to Japan and that Japan needs to do more. But if you set the question up Japan doing things by itself or with the United States, you're asking the wrong question, because it's impossible for Japan to defend itself alone against China and North Korea and Russia. So the future is integration and networking. But as a politician, are you, I don't mean to ask what sounds like a rude question maybe, but as a politician, are you willing to explain this to the third generation, or are you going to be a populist and just do what you think the third generation wants you to do?
As far as, I'm not talking as an establishment figure, but basically your question reflects exactly my way of thinking, which is that Japan needs to be able to protect itself. And we need to have military power to do that, but we can't do it by ourselves. And that's the reason why we need to receive help from the United States. And that implies that we should have mutuality in our relationship. And we, of course, need to increase our defense spending. That's my way of thinking. But as far as politicians or establishment figures, when they talk to each other about this, they don't know whether the people understand this or not. And they need to know whether people understand this or not. Of course, politicians might think they have the right way of thinking, but they can't just say, this is my way of thinking, so you should follow me. They need to be able to talk to ordinary citizens. I think that Japanese people don't really think much about the extent to which we can protect ourselves. I think that the establishment just talking to itself will not lead to understanding on the part of ordinary people. And so we need to look at Article 9, and those of us who have been educated in the era of Article 9, I understand that the Article 9 is a constraint on us, and we can't have military force. We cannot attack anyone, that we should work toward peace. That's what I've been taught basically my whole life. And so the Abe administration and the political establishment, which really is up on these issues, feel that we need to be able to protect ourselves, and we need to be able to help the United States as well, and that 1% of our GDP being dedicated to military spending is too little. I think the political establishment understands that, but ordinary people don't. And so what should we do given that situation? I think the politicians need to be able to explain in easy-to-understand terms what it is that the current situation is and how it is that Japan needs to change. In order to change things, we can't just change politics. We need to change the political establishment, but we also need to work to change people's perceptions. And in order to change political perceptions, politicians need to be able to talk to people, need to be able to explain the situation. But we don't have much time, and so my proposal today was to ask you, the United States, to throw a fastball at us, to shake up the situation, apply pressure to us, and say that you might withdraw military forces from Japan. If that were the case, we would be thrown into chaos. People are always talking about how they're opposed to the U.S. bases, but some of our newspapers always say that. But what if actually the United States did withdraw? What if Japan had to provide for its own security? I think that that would be kind of an amazing situation, and this is something that would cause people to think about what we'd have to do if the United States weren't protecting us. So if President Trump could say, tomorrow we're going to withdraw our forces from Japan, I think that that would be very helpful for us, and that would change the perception of our people.
Leader, you were more like Meiji era anti-establishment political leaders, because you obviously want more gaiatsu to change the system. Kevin's question is a good one, because Hashimoto-san, you've taken quite specific stands on politically difficult issues like TPP or reforming agriculture. And so maybe after raising these questions, which I think are the right questions.
すいません、通訳が入ってなくて。
入ってない。
ごめんなさい。
あ、もう一回です。
大体いいです。
大丈夫ですか？
大丈夫です。今で。はい。あ、でいいですよ。
いいですか？今までで大丈夫です。
大丈夫です。
So anyway, I think watching your political TV show, which I watch sometimes in Japan, I look forward to more ideas about how to make the U.S.-Japan alliance stronger in concrete terms. You've raised the right questions, and as you did with TPP, I look forward to hearing some concrete ideas about how to strengthen the alliance beyond asking the right difficult questions. I think we can take one more, and then we really should let Hashimoto-san go. So we'll take one more question, if we have. Okay. I want to thank you. We ran over, so I apologize to the audience for my poor time management, but this has been interesting, and I think definitely people who care about Japan and U.S.-Japan relations will be watching Ishin no Kai and listening to your political commentary. And I think it's important that you came here and that you came to kind of the establishment and educated us and took some hard questions, and wish you the best for the rest of your visit. And I look forward to hearing your commentary going forward. So please join me in thanking Hashimoto-san.
Thank you.